Hi, everyone. We're glad you're here to watch another story. We wanted to mention something important. Right now, 97% of the people who tune in to our channel haven't subscribed. That means a lot of you might be missing out on our latest stories. Subscribing is the easiest way to ensure you get notified whenever we post a new video about infidelity and the twists and turns of life. It's completely free, and it means you'll always be in the loop. Plus, it really supports our channel and helps us continue to find and share these compelling stories. So, take a moment now and hit that subscribe button below. You won't regret it. Okay, now to today's story. Sometimes I sit here and think, what was the exact moment things started to go wrong? Not just wrong, but like a train derailing, in slow motion. You see the sparks, you hear the screeching, but you just can't stop it. For me, I think it was the socks. Yeah, sounds dumb, right? But it's always the little things, isn't it? The ones that don't quite fit. Sean, my husband of 20 years, was my husband. He always had this thing about his socks. They had to be a certain brand, a certain thickness, always folded just so in the drawer. I swear the man could probably identify his socks blindfolded. So, one Tuesday morning, I was doing laundry, just like I'd done a million times before, and I found a pair of socks in the hamper that weren't his. They were fancier, thinner, silkier, with this little tiny logo I didn't recognize. Now, Sean wouldn't be caught dead in socks like that. He was a plain white cotton kind of guy, through and through. My first thought was maybe one of his buddies had stayed over after a poker night and left them behind. But Sean hadn't had a poker night in months. Then, this little voice in the back of my head, the one you usually try to ignore, started whispering. It said, "Those aren't a man's socks, Ashley." And that's when the first little crack appeared in the perfectly smooth surface of my world. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he'd gotten them as a gift and hadn't worn them yet? But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Sean was practical. He wouldn't buy or wear something like that. And he definitely wouldn't hide them in the laundry. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention. Little things, He was suddenly staying late at the office, more often. He'd always called if he was going to be more than an hour late for dinner. Now, it was just a quick text. Stuck at work. And his phone. He was glued to it. Always face down on the table. Always taking it with him even when he just went to the bathroom. It was like he was hiding something precious. Or someone. One night, he said he had a conference out of town. A quick overnight trip. He packed his bag, kissed me goodbye, and I stood at the door, watching his car disappear down the street. It was a Wednesday. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. Later that evening, I was looking for a recipe online, and I absent-mindedly picked up his tablet. It was still logged into his email. I know, snooping is bad, but that little voice was screaming now. It felt like I had to look. And what I found? It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. There were emails, lots of them. To someone named Chloe. They were sweet. Too sweet for a work colleague. Talking about how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to see her again. And then there were the pictures. Pictures of them together. Laughing, holding hands. One picture. Let's just say they weren't discussing company strategy. My world tilted. Everything I thought I knew, everything we had built together over 2 decades suddenly felt like a lie. Sean, my Sean. The man I'd shared my life with, my bed with, my secrets with. He was with someone else. Younger. Prettier, probably. The thought made my stomach churn. I didn't confront him right away. I was too stunned, too hurt. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck and then run over for good measure. I spent the next few days and a daze just going through the motions. I still made him dinner, still did his laundry, though I made sure to keep those fancy socks separate. I even smiled and nodded when he told me about his successful conference. Inside, though, I was a mess. A furious, heartbroken mess. That's when the idea started to form. It wasn't immediate. It kind of simmered in the back of my mind, like a pot on low heat. Revenge. It's a nasty word, I know. Not something I ever thought I'd consider. But the betrayal, it cut deep. It made me feel small and stupid, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So I did what any sensible woman in my situation would do, or maybe not so sensible, but it felt right to me. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Tony. He looked like he'd seen it all, and he probably had. I told him what I suspected, gave him Sean's schedule, and let him do his thing. It took about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of pretending everything was normal, of lying awake at night wondering who this Chloe was and what Sean saw in her. 2 weeks of feeling like my life was on hold. Then Tony called. He had the evidence. Pictures, videos, the whole shebang. Enough to sink a battleship, as they say. I met Tony at a coffee shop. He laid out the photos on the table like a deck of cards. There they were, Sean and Chloe. In restaurants, holding hands in the park, going into her apartment. The evidence was undeniable. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life, except that someone else was my husband. Looking at those pictures, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Anger, and a strange sense of determination. I wasn't going to cry and beg him to stay. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. I was going to make him pay, not just emotionally, but financially too. I took those pictures, every single one, and tucked them away. My plan was starting to take shape. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back control, about showing Sean that I wasn't some doormat he could just wipe his feet on. I was Ashley, and I was done being taken for granted. So, there I was, armed with a stack of incriminating photos and a simmering pot of fury. The next few days were weird. I acted like nothing was wrong. Made his breakfast, packed his lunch, asked him about his day. He didn't suspect a thing. He probably thought he'd gotten away with it. Men can be so clueless sometimes, can't they? Especially when they think they're being sneaky. I decided to wait for the right moment. I didn't want to just explode in the middle of dinner. I wanted to do it on my terms, when I was ready. That opportunity came one Saturday morning. Sean was in the garage, tinkering with his precious vintage car. A real money pit, that thing was. I walked out there holding a cup of coffee for him, like I always did. "Morning, honey," I said, trying to sound casual. He looked up, greasy hands and a big grin on his face. "Hey, you. What's up?" "Nothing much," I said, taking a sip of my own coffee. "Just wondering, how was your conference last week?" He hesitated for a split second, just a tiny flicker in his eyes, but I caught it. "Oh, the usual. Lots of meetings, boring presentations." "Right," I said, setting his coffee down on the workbench. "Did you meet anyone interesting?" He chuckled. "Nah, just the same old crowd." I took a deep breath. This was it. "Really? Because Tony seemed to think you met someone interesting." His smile vanished. His face went pale like he'd seen a ghost. "Tony? Who's Tony?" "My new friend," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "He's a private investigator. The kind you hire when you suspect your husband is sleeping with someone else," he stammered, trying to find the words. "Ashley, what are you talking about? This is crazy." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photos. I didn't throw them at him or anything dramatic like that. I just laid them out on the hood of his precious car, one by one. Sean and Chloe, smiling and holding hands. Sean and Chloe entering her apartment building. Sean and Chloe, well, He just stared at the pictures, his mouth hanging open. He looked like a fish out of water. Finally, he found his voice. Ashley, I, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You're probably going to tell me she's just a business associate, or maybe your long-lost cousin. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking at the pictures, then at me, then back at the pictures. Look, Ashley, he finally said, his voice pleading. It just happened. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice rising. Sean, we've been married for 20 years. We have a life together. How could this not mean anything? He tried to touch my hand, but I pulled it away. I didn't want his touch. It felt dirty. I made a mistake, he said, his eyes full of what looked like genuine remorse. Please, Ashley, give me another chance. I'll do anything. Anything? I raised an eyebrow. Really? Would you be willing to sign over the deed to the house? How about your retirement account? He flinched. Now, Ashley, let's not be hasty. Hasty? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Sean, you were hasty when you decided to stick. Well, never mind. Where it didn't belong. I've had time to think about this, and I've decided what I want. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I want a divorce, I said, the words feeling surprisingly good coming out of my mouth. And I want a hefty settlement. You can explain that to Chloe while you're living in your new, smaller apartment. He looked like I'd slapped him. Ashley, you can't be serious. We have a good life together. Did we? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I was the only one who thought so. He tried to argue, to plead, to bargain. He promised he'd stop seeing Chloe, that he'd go to therapy, that he'd take me on a second honeymoon. But I'd made up my mind. The trust was broken. And once that's gone, what's left? I told him I'd be in touch with my lawyer. Then, I walked back into the house, leaving him standing there in the garage, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. It felt empowering, like I'd finally taken back control of my life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers and paperwork. It wasn't easy. There were days when I cried, days when I doubted my decision. But then I'd remember those pictures, the lies, the feeling of being so completely blindsided, and my resolve would harden again. While the lawyers were doing their thing, I decided I wasn't going to just sit around and mope. I started thinking about what I wanted, what made me happy. It had been a long time since I'd put myself first. I joined a gym. It was intimidating at first, all those young, fit people in their fancy workout clothes. But I stuck with it. I started working with a trainer, and slowly but surely, I started to feel stronger, both physically and mentally. It was amazing what lifting weights could do for your mood. I also started reconnecting with old friends. Women I'd lost touch with over the years because my life had become so focused on Sean. We'd go out for lunch, see movies, just talk. It was so good to have that support system again. And then there was Mark. He was younger. A lot younger. I met him at the gym. He was a trainer there. We started talking, and one thing led to another. It was just a fling, really. Nothing serious. But it felt good to feel desired again. To know that I was still attractive, still interesting, even after all these years. It was a confidence boost I desperately needed. Some people might judge me for it. Having a fling so soon after finding out about Sean's affair. But honestly, I didn't care. Sean had made his choices, and now I was making mine. I was done being the victim. I was taking charge of my own happiness. The divorce went through. A few months later. It was messy, as divorces often are, but I got what I wanted. The house, a significant chunk of his retirement savings, enough to start over. Leaving Sean wasn't easy. We had shared a lot of years together. There were good times, too. But in the end, his betrayal had poisoned everything. I knew I deserved. better. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. After the divorce was final, there was this strange mix of feelings. Relief, definitely. Like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But also a little bit of sadness, you know? 20 years is a long time. It's a lot of memories, even if some of them turned out to be not so great in the end. And then there was this emptiness. Like a room in my house that used to be full of furniture had suddenly been cleared out. The first few weeks living alone in the house felt weird. It was so quiet. Sean had always been a noisy guy. He'd hum while he was making coffee, whistle. In the shower, always had the TV on in the background. Now it was just me and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I found myself turning on the radio just to have some noise. But slowly, things started to change. I started to enjoy the quiet. I could read without being interrupted. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV without having to compromise. I could even leave my shoes in the middle of the living room floor if I felt like it, though I usually didn't. Old habits die hard. I really threw myself into the gym. It became my sanctuary. I loved the feeling of pushing my body, of getting stronger. My trainer, Mark, was a good motivator. He was young, full of energy, and surprisingly insightful for his age. Our fling had kind of fizzled out after the divorce. It was fun while it lasted, but we both knew it wasn't anything serious. We stayed friends, though, and he continued to push me in my workouts. I also started exploring some of the things I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time or the courage for when I was with Sean. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class. I even signed up for a weekend hiking trip with a group of women I'd met at the gym. It was all a little scary at first, putting myself out there like that. But it was also exhilarating. It felt like I was finally living for myself, not for someone else. One of the things I'd always wanted to do was learn to play the guitar. Sean had always scoffed at the idea, said I didn't have the coordination, but after he left, I thought, why not? I found a local music teacher, a sweet older woman, named Mrs. Henderson, and started taking lessons. My fingers were clumsy at first, and the chords felt impossible to master, but I kept at it, and slowly, I started to get the hang of it. There's something so satisfying about making music, even if it's just a simple tune. I also started traveling more. Sean had never been a big traveler. He was a homebody. But I'd always dreamed of seeing the world. So, I started small. Weekend trip to a nearby city, then a longer trip to the coast. I even went on a solo trip to Italy. Me, myself, and I, wandering through ancient ruins and eating delicious pasta. It was liberating. Of course, there were still moments when I thought about Sean, especially in the beginning. I'd see something that reminded me of him, or I'd have a dream about our life together, and there would be this little pang of sadness. But those moments became less and less frequent over time. I also heard through the grapevine that Sean wasn't doing so well. Apparently, Chloe had dumped him not long after the divorce. Surprise, surprise. And he was struggling to adjust to living on his own. I have to admit, there was a small part of me that felt a little bit of satisfaction. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. But mostly, I just felt indifferent. He was no longer a part of my life, and honestly, I didn't spend much time thinking about him. My focus was on me, on building a new life, a better life, one where I was happy and fulfilled. And you know what? It was working. I was in the best shape of my life. I was pursuing my passions. I had a great group of friends, and I was genuinely happy. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset. I had my guitar in my lap, and I was strumming a simple melody. I felt this sense of peace wash over me. It had been a long and difficult journey, but I had made it through. I was stronger than I ever thought I could be. And then it hit me. I didn't need Sean to be happy. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was whole on my own. It was a powerful realization. I thought about those fancy socks, the ones that started it all. It seemed so silly now that something so small could have led to such a big change in my life. But sometimes, it's the little things that open our eyes to the bigger picture. Looking back, I wouldn't say I was glad that Sean cheated on me. It was a painful experience, but I am grateful for what it taught me. It taught me that I was stronger than I thought. It taught me the importance of putting myself first. And it ultimately led me to a happier, more fulfilling life. Life settled into a new rhythm after the divorce. It wasn't the rhythm I'd been used to for 20 years, but it was my rhythm now. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I wanted, and spent my time doing things that brought me joy. It sounds simple, but after years of putting someone else's needs first, it felt like a revelation. My pottery class became a real highlight of my week. I never thought of myself as a creative person, but there was something so satisfying about taking a lump of clay and shaping it into something beautiful, or at least something resembling beautiful. My first few attempts were, well, let's just say they looked more like abstract art than actual pottery. But with Mrs. Henderson's patient guidance, I started to get better. I even made a couple of mugs that didn't immediately fall apart. I proudly displayed them in my kitchen, little reminders of my newfound abilities. The book club was another unexpected source of joy. I'd always been a reader, but discussing books with other women, hearing their perspectives and interpretations, opened up whole new worlds for me. We read all sorts of things, from classic literature to trashy romance novels, and everything in between. It was a great way to connect with people and to challenge my own thinking. Plus, it gave me an excuse to drink wine and eat snacks once a month, which is always a bonus. The hiking trip was definitely outside my comfort zone. I'd never really considered myself an outdoorsy person, but my friends from the gym convinced me to go, and I'm so glad they did. The scenery was breathtaking, the air was fresh, and there was something incredibly empowering about reaching the top of a mountain under your own steam. My legs were sore for days afterwards, but it was a good kind of sore, you know? The kind that reminds you that you're alive and capable. My guitar playing was coming along too. I still wasn't ready to quit my day job and become a rock star, but I could now play a few simple songs all the way through without too many mistakes. It was a great way to unwind after a long day. I'd sit on my porch in the evenings, strumming my guitar and watching the fireflies. It was peaceful. Occasionally, I'd run into people who knew Sean. They'd usually ask how he was doing, and I'd just shrug and say I didn't know. Which was the truth. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized. I heard through mutual friends that he was still struggling. He'd gone through a few more short-lived relationships and was apparently still trying to figure things out. I didn't feel any real animosity towards him anymore. Mostly just pity. He'd had a good life, a loving wife, and he'd thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of what? Excitement? Validation? It seemed so short-sighted now. One day, I was at the grocery store and I saw him. He looked older. Tired. He had a woman with him, a younger woman, of course. They were arguing about something in the produce aisle. I just kept my head down and walked past them. It was a strange feeling, seeing him like that. It was like looking at a ghost of my past. Someone I used to know so well, but who was now a stranger. Later that day, I thought about Chloe. I wondered what had happened to her. Had she found her happily ever after? Or was she just another fleeting moment in Sean's life? I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't really care. My focus was on my own happiness now. I started thinking about what I wanted for the future. I wasn't looking for another husband. I enjoyed my independence too much. But I wasn't opposed to the idea of a meaningful connection with someone someday. Someone who appreciated me for who I was, who was honest and trustworthy. But I wasn't in any hurry. I was happy on my own. I realized that the whole experience with Sean, as painful as it was, had actually been a catalyst for growth. It had forced me to reevaluate my life, to figure out what was truly important to me. And in the process, I had discovered a strength and resilience I never knew I had. I was no longer defined by my relationship with Sean. I was Ashley, a woman who was learning new things, exploring new possibilities, and building a life that was authentically her own. And that felt pretty amazing. Sometimes when I'm talking to people and they ask about my past, I tell them the story of the socks. It always gets a chuckle. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest changes in our lives start with the smallest, most unexpected things. And that even though life can throw some pretty nasty curveballs, we have the power to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and create a new game plan. A better game plan. One where we're the star player. Time has a funny way of smoothing things over, doesn't it? The sharp edges of the hurt and anger I felt after Sean's betrayal have softened over the years. It's not that I've forgotten what happened, not by a long shot, but it doesn't consume me anymore. It's just a part of my story. A chapter. I've turned the page on. My life now is, well, it's good. Really good. I still go to the gym regularly. I'm probably in better shape now in my late 40s than I was in my 30s. Who knew a little heartbreak could be such a good motivator? I still play the guitar, though I'm definitely not going to be headlining any concerts anytime soon. But it's a relaxing hobby, and it brings me pleasure. My pottery skills have improved considerably. I've even sold a few pieces at local craft fairs. It's not enough to retire on, but it's a nice little boost to my income and a great feeling to know that people appreciate something I've created with my own two hands. The book club is still going strong. We've become a close-knit group of friends, sharing not just our thoughts on books, but also the ups and downs of our lives. They've been a wonderful support system. And I even went on another big trip. This time, I went to Southeast Asia with one of the women from my hiking group. We explored ancient temples, rode elephants, ethically, of course, and ate some of the most amazing food I've ever tasted. It was an incredible experience, and I realized that traveling solo is great, but sharing those experiences with a good friend is even better. As for relationships, well, I haven't found the one yet, and honestly, I'm not actively looking. I've dated a few nice men here and there, but nothing has really clicked. And that's okay. I've learned that my happiness doesn't depend on having a partner. I'm perfectly content with my own company, my friends, and my hobbies. If the right person comes along, great. If not, that's fine too. I do occasionally think about Sean. Usually, it's when I hear about someone going through a similar situation. A friend whose husband cheated, or a news story about infidelity. And I always feel a pang of sympathy for the person who's been betrayed. It's a terrible feeling, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I heard a while back that Sean had moved out of state. He apparently got a new job and wanted a fresh start. I don't know if he ever truly understood the damage he caused. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It doesn't really matter to me anymore. I've moved on. Sometimes people ask me if I ever got my revenge. And I guess, in a way, I did. Not in the dramatic movie-style way I might have initially imagined. My revenge wasn't about making Sean suffer. It was about making myself happy. It was about refusing to let his actions define me or my future. It was about showing him, and more importantly, showing myself, that I didn't need him to be happy. And in the end, that's the best kind of revenge there is. Looking back on that time, it feels like a lifetime ago. The woman I was then, the one who found those fancy socks and whose world crumbled around her, feels like a different person. I'm stronger now, more confident, more resilient. I've learned that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and that sometimes the things that seem like the end of the world can actually be the beginning of something new and better. So, if you're going through something similar, if you've been betrayed or hurt, just remember that you're not alone. It's okay to feel angry, hurt, and confused. But don't let those feelings consume you. Take your time to heal, and then start focusing on yourself. Discover your passions, reconnect with friends, and don't be afraid to try new things. You might just surprise yourself at what you're capable of. And who knows? Maybe one day you'll look back on this difficult time and see it as the moment you finally started living for yourself, just like I did. And trust me, that's a pretty good feeling. So, that's my confession. The story of the socks, the betrayal, and the unexpected journey to finding myself again. It wasn't always easy, but I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe I would have skipped the part with the cheating, but everything else, it led me to where I am today. And I'm finally, truly happy. And that, my friends, is the best ending I could have ever asked for.